Hi, I'm Phil Ashey from the American Anglican Council, serving the Anglican Church in North America in my capacity as chair of the Governance Task Force. I'm pleased to bring you this second round opportunity to comment on the proposed changes to the 2021 report of the Governance Task Force on amending our canons. I have two comments that I want to make. First of all, that round one that we just finished is a real triumph of conciliarism. Conciliarism is the way that we as Anglicans make decisions together. It's not always clean. It can be a little messy. Conciliarism means that what touches all needs to be decided by all. That doesn't mean that all are going to be happy in the end, but it brings everybody in the church together, just as the early church councils did. And we received so many good, thoughtful, and in most cases, kind and generous comments from those who wrote to us about really two sets of canons. One were the ones in Title I, Canon 5 on diocese, and changes to the Sustainability Canon, and the other were the changes we've proposed to Title IV. I think the other comment I'd say is that we really heard the heart of good Anglican, what we'd call constitutional conciliarism, the idea that there needs to be checks and balances so that no one order, bishops, clergy, laity, has disproportionate power in the decision-making process over another. So in any event, we'll talk a little bit more about these things. Really, the only comments that we got were on Title I, Canon 5, and the revisions to Title IV. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time going back over what we already sent you by way of interview. But simply note that this round, round two, will be for the next 2 weeks, and our cutoff date for comments will be May 31. So we're sending this to all the delegates of Provincial Council for their review, and to the 240 members of the AAC Anglican Legal Society, chancellors, canons to the ordinary. For many of you, this will be your third opportunity to actually make comments. But again, this is a manifestation of our commitment to conciliar governance. So let me go ahead and address the first section, Canon 1, or Title I, Canon 5. And the question, of course, is how can the Executive Committee and the College of Bishops assess the sustainability of dioceses in light of Title I, Canon 5, Section 7, and as a condition of granting consent for an episcopal election under Title III, Canon 8, Section 4. So if you'll see on the video here, Canon 1.5 of Diocese, concerning structure, we've simply added the following sentence to what is already our practice, and that is that a diocese is composed of a minimum of 12 congregations with an average Sunday morning attendance of 50 each, and a collective average Sunday morning attendance of at least 1,000. And this important sentence, a diocese shall demonstrate that there is sufficient financial support for the office of the bishop and shall provide financial support to the province in the spirit of Title I, Canon 9, which is our 10-10-10 model. Now, this makes clear that a diocese is to ensure the support of the office of the bishop and support of the province. Support of the office of bishop does not have to be only through the diocesan budget. For instance, we have dioceses that are led by rector bishops, and the rector, or the congregation for which the bishop is rector, substantially supports the office of the bishop. We have other situations where bishops are really functioning as missionary bishops and are on a part-time kind of a stipend. And doing it at great sacrifice, but we want to support those efforts. There just has to be a showing that you're supporting the office of the bishop. We moved the exceptions sentence down to section 5 concerning applying for diocesan status because it seemed more appropriate to put it there because it has to do with the application process. And then section 7, which was concerning diocesan sustainability. We have changed that. As a result of robust comments from many people who pointed out the missionary, ancient, patristic nature of dioceses, that it shouldn't be about sustainability as a kind of a business sense, but rather about strengthening the diocese. So we've changed the title of this to concerning the strengthening of dioceses, and it now reads, the Executive Committee shall review the annual diocesan reports, period, all right? No mention of sustainability, in light of the standards for a diocese as provided in section 1 of this canon. So those things, the numerical requirements, support for the office, support for the province. The Executive Committee may invite a dialogue with any diocese with the objective of strengthening its mission and ministry. Now, that points out that in terms of sustainability, we're moving into strengthening the diocese, and instead focuses on the Executive Committee offering to assist dioceses in strengthening their mission and ministry rather than judging them on whether or not they're sustainable. So I believe that's a more missionally faithful and Anglican way of addressing this review. With regards to section 2, we received no comments about membership in good standing, and so we'll continue to create a task force to draft a model diocesan canon on a provincial standard for membership in good standing. And we will report back to you on that in 2022. With regards to changing the vote by the bishops from consent or approval of a diocesan election to just approval, again, we're referring this out for further work, and we'll come back in 2024 when we'll have a provincial assembly that can actually address whether or not we need a constitutional amendment. With regards to Title III, Canon 8, Section 4, the nature of the consent or choice that the College of Bishops shall exercise pursuant to this canon following the election of a diocesan, remember we said we've got to balance the issue of subsidiarity, which is, the diocese gets to make this decision, and there shouldn't be a complete de novo review of everything the diocese has done. On the other hand, the value is we're electing someone as a bishop of the whole church. So how do we balance those two? And we came up with the language that you have unchanged because we received no comments on this at all. And so the rationale is that the draft amendments that we've added ground the consent or choice by the college in two areas of the canons regarding holy orders. Those canonical requirements for holy orders regarding the qualities of those who are to be ordained, and specifically those sections that touch upon divorce and remarriage that would otherwise be an impediment to episcopal election and consecration, as provided in Title III, Canon 2, Sections 4 through 6. And then secondly, the specific criteria for the episcopate enumerated in Title III, Canon 8, Section 3. And so this really helps the college as they are looking at consent or choice in validating an episcopal election. It narrows to more objective standards with regards to the character, the doctrinal faithfulness, and the competence of the person who's been elected bishop. And that is a much more helpful standard for the bishops to exercise their ability under the canons without being redundant or overreaching. Okay, so the next section is the authority under Title IV for the Archbishop to issue an inhibition against the bishop. We received robust discussion and good points made by a number of people who pointed out the need for checks and balances so that we do not empower an archbishop or a dean of the province in the same way that we've seen bishops empowered in the Episcopal Church. So we want to be very careful about providing the archbishop and the dean and bishops in general the ability to respond to situations without allowing them to do things that are vague and indefinite and that have no possibility of review. In other words, we're very, very sensitive to the need for checks and balances and not overreaching. So what we're talking about is situations when a bishop needs to be temporarily inhibited pending the process by which he might be brought to presentment and trial. And as we mentioned in our first report, our canons do not yet explicitly authorize the archbishop to issue such an inhibition. Only when the archbishop or a bishop has been presented under our current canons may there be an inhibition, and that only by an affirmative vote of 3 of the 5 senior active diocesan bishops in the College of Bishops. So in situations where there are reasonable grounds to believe that a bishop or the archbishop has engaged in conduct subject to a presentment, or in the best interests of the accused and the church, we believe the archbishop should have express authority under Title IV to admonish or inhibit a bishop during the process of investigating accusations and prior to any presentation or voluntary submission to discipline. And you know, in the one case where we've actually had to do this, we actually had a fairly lengthy period of investigation because it involved computer records, analysis of phone records, and that took a lot of time to hire a forensic investigator to do that. So we want to make this process flexible enough to meet the needs of the investigation, but also just and fair, and acknowledging due process and natural justice. So upon extensive discussion of this need, we concluded that there needed to be a more extensive amendment of Title IV Canon 2, Title IV Canon 5, and Title IV Canon 9 to clarify the nature and use of admonitions by bishops upon clergy and presbyters, by the archbishop upon a bishop, and by the dean of the province, with the college upon the archbishop with appropriate checks and balances. So let's take a look at Title IV Canon 2 of charges against and godly admonitions to bishops, presbyters, and deacons. Now in Section 7, concerning the charges themselves, we simply made an editorial word change to remove the masculine pronoun and just say in which such clergy hold office. And that acknowledges the fact that we are a process that has a dual integrity with regards to men and women in holy orders. Concerning godly admonitions, what we added was a new Section B. The archbishop may issue a godly admonition to a bishop, or the dean of the province to the archbishop. No admonition shall be issued until the bishop, archbishop, or dean of the province, or such person to whom authority has been validly delegated under these canons, shall have met personally with the one receiving the admonition. That could be a presbyter, a deacon, a bishop, the archbishop, the dean. And the written admonition shall be specific concerning the matter complained of, the canonical or theological basis for the complaint, and shall provide a reasonable time for any required action to be taken. Of course, a godly admonition can be used alone or in conjunction with an inhibition. And we added these paragraphs. In the case of an admonition to a bishop, the archbishop must obtain the written consent of 3 of the 5 senior active diocesan members of the College of Bishops by date of consecration, exclusive, of course, of the archbishop, any bishop who's the subject of the admonition, and any bishop who may recuse himself to the contents of the admonition before its issuance. Given that a godly admonition is a less drastic method of discipline than an inhibition, the committee believed that requiring only 3 of the 5 senior bishops by date of consecration to affirm the contents of an admonition is an appropriate check on the authority of the archbishop or dean of the province to issue such an admonition. And then we added this paragraph. In the case of an admonition to the archbishop, the dean of the province must first obtain the written consent of 3 of the 5 senior bishops by date of consecration. Again, an adequate check and balance, but flexibility for the admonition to take place. We then move on to Title 4, Canon 5 of Courts, Membership and Procedures, and there we simply tidied up the language of Title 4, Canon 5, the membership of the courts, the court for a trial of a bishop whose jurisdiction shall be limited to proceedings against a bishop of this church, including the archbishop. So that's where a presentment against the archbishop would land. First, in the provincial court for the trial of a bishop. And then down in section 3, talking about the court for the trial of a bishop, the senior diocesan member of the College of Bishops in date of consecration shall be the president of the court, exclusive of the bishop under trial and any bishop who may recuse himself. And the archbishop, or in the case of a proceeding against the archbishop, the dean of the province shall also appoint a legal advisor to the court. And these changes, again, simply acknowledge that the archbishop can also be tried in the court for the trial of the bishop, and that the selection of the president of the court should take into consideration conflicts of interest and possibilities of recusal. Moving on to Title 4, Canon 9 of Inhibitions, we received robust and helpful commentary regarding the standard that must be met prior to an inhibition. In this amended version, we suggest a 2-pronged standard, both that there are reasonable grounds for a presentment, which is akin to the more likely than not to prevail on the merits standard required for a preliminary injunction in the U.S. federal courts, and that an inhibition will be in the best interests of the church, meaning the accusers and the accused were removed to make it clear that the bishop's motivation must be the health of the church, which includes both accuser and accused. So please note that this portion of the standard is akin to the balance of equities that must be considered before the issuance of a preliminary injunction in U.S. federal courts. And so the language now reads, an inhibition is a temporary suspension of a bishop, including the archbishop, a presbyter, or a deacon, from the exercise of ministry in whole or in part, when one having authority under these canons, of course that would be the archbishop, dean, or bishop, upon reasonable grounds that the accused has engaged in conduct upon which the accused may present it, and that it is in the best interest of the church, again, that 2-pronged standard, to do so, pending an accusation, canonical investigation, presentment, trial, or voluntary submission to discipline under these canons. An inhibition can be used alone or in conjunction with a godly admonition. An inhibition, again, must be in writing, signed by one having authority, again, archbishop, dean, or bishops, under this canon, or one to whom authority has been validly delegated under these canons. So let's move on to section 2 under inhibitions, and this is concerning inhibition of a presbyter or deacon. Helpful comments were received about the vagueness of a temporary inhibition. So we selected a time period of 60 days, and the extension of an inhibition of a priest or a deacon is now subject to the shared discretion of a bishop and a standing committee or its equivalent. In the interests of subsidiarity, the process by which a diocese elects to determine how advice and consent shall be granted has been left to the diocese to discern. So it now reads, Section 2, under concerning inhibition of a presbyter or deacon, a bishop may temporarily inhibit a presbyter or deacon under this canon. Such temporary inhibition shall last no longer than 60 days. We then omit the language that's currently in there and then add this: with the advice and consent of the standing committee or its equivalent, any inhibition of a presbyter or deacon may be extended until such charge is dropped, action is taken by a trial court, or the accused voluntarily submits to the discipline of the church. Where's the check and balance? Well, it's in section 2. Upon application by a presbyter or a deacon who has been inhibited under this canon, and upon a showing of good cause, the archbishop or his designate may modify or revoke the inhibition, and such decision shall be rendered within 30 days of the application. So if you believe as a presbyter or deacon you're being unfairly treated by the bishop and the standing committee or its equivalent, you have a right of appeal directly to the archbishop or his designee. So moving on now to Section 3 of Title 4, Canon 9 of Inhibitions. This is concerning inhibition of a bishop. So we received, again, a wonderful, robust commentary that the previous draft provided insufficient checks on the power of the archbishop or dean of the province to inhibit a bishop or the archbishop. So accordingly, in this version, the archbishop or dean must now receive the written consent of the 5 senior diocesan members of the college before issuing an inhibition to a bishop or the archbishop. So again, it's different than an admonition. 3 of the 5 was sufficient. But for an inhibition, much higher standard, all 5. There has to be unanimous consent. All right? In all cases, provision is made for selecting panels of bishops to share in this heavy responsibility, including ensuring that the inhibiting bishop, the one under discipline, and any bishop with a conflict that leads to recusal are not considered in constituting such a panel. And in the interest of due process, an appeal of an inhibition will now be heard by a newly constituted panel of bishops. So I'll just read through this language. Under Section 3 concerning inhibition of a bishop, the archbishop may temporarily inhibit a bishop under this canon. Prior to such temporary inhibition, the archbishop shall obtain the written consent of the 5 senior active diocesan members of the College of Bishops by date of consecration, exclusive of the archbishop, the bishop who is the subject of the inhibition, and any bishop who may recuse himself. Such temporary inhibition shall last no longer than 60 days. So again, high standard, 5 bishops consent before the inhibition can be issued. Consent must be in writing by the panel. The inhibition must be in writing. It only lasts 60 days. Secondly, by unanimous vote of a panel of the 5 senior active diocesan members of the College of Bishops by date of consecration, exclusive of the archbishop, the bishop who is the subject of the inhibition, and any bishop who may recuse himself, any inhibition of a bishop may be extended until such charge is dropped, action is taken by a court for the trial of a bishop, or the accused voluntarily submits to the discipline of the church. So again, what happens if like we had in the one case we've had of a presentment against a bishop, where we had forensic investigation that took longer than 60 days? Well, the archbishop could bring it back to that panel of bishops and say, we need to extend this for another 60 days. And again, they would have the opportunity to review the evidence. Thus far, the reasons, is it reasonable? In writing, all 5, written notice. So, thirdly, upon application by a bishop who has been inhibited under this canon and upon a showing of good cause, a panel of the 5 senior active diocesan members of the College of Bishops, by date of consecration, exclusive of the bishop who's the subject of the inhibition, any bishop involved in the original inhibition, and any bishop who may recuse himself may by unanimous vote modify or revoke the inhibition. So here we have a check and balance. And again, it's not by the same panel of 5 bishops that approved the inhibition in the first place, but by a different panel. Such decision shall be rendered within 30 days of the application. So in other words, you as a bishop may be inhibited. You can exercise your right, and within 30 days, a new panel of 5 bishops has the opportunity to review your case and modify it. Now, what about the inhibition of an archbishop under Section 4? Again, very similar language. The only difference is instead of saying the archbishop may temporarily inhibit a bishop under this canon, it's now the dean of the province may temporarily inhibit the archbishop. And again, he has to obtain the written consent of the 5 senior active bishops, has to be in writing. Temporary inhibition shall last no longer than 60 days. By unanimous vote of a panel of those 5 senior active diocesan bishops, the inhibition of the archbishop can be extended as long as needed. And then the archbishop also has a right of appeal, just like any diocesan bishop, to have his inhibition reviewed by a different panel of 5 senior bishops who may modify or revoke that inhibition. So we believe this establishes not only the flexibility and express authority on our canons to deal with the need to inhibit not only presbyters and deacons, but bishops, the dean, even the archbishop, if needed, without concentrating power unduly in any one bishop, including the archbishop or the dean, and it provides a conciliar process of checks and balances of other bishops being involved in that process. Now, the next 2 sections that we talked about were nominating qualified members to serve on the provincial courts. We've been very busy, and we've got the courts all convened and fully staffed, and they've all adopted the rules of procedure that we sent to you in the first round. So that's all good news. There will be elections. The nominating committee of the executive committee has a full list of slates, bios, and qualifications that you'll have an opportunity to look at and decide who are going to be the members of the court. And again, just a reminder, the 2 courts that you're going to elect are the Provincial Tribunal, which is like our Supreme Court, and the Court for the Trial of the Bishop. The Archbishop has the authority to appoint the Court for Extraordinary Jurisdiction, and all of the members of those court have agreed to serve another term, and he will simply do that. But what we're going to do for both the provincial courts, tribunal and trial of the bishop, is not only put up a full slate of members, but then we'll make sure, because of the possibility of recusals and conflicts of interest, that we have alternates in order of voting that can serve as alternates in the event that there's a recusal or a conflict of interest. The final section in Title IV was Canon 10, where we include notification of all diocesan clergy by the sentencing bishop. And the reason for that is that we have situations where currently the reporting is to the office of the archbishop and then disseminated by him among all the bishops having jurisdiction. And this leaves kind of a cone of silence, as one of our members said. The proposed amendment requires the sentencing bishop to notify the clergy of the diocese in which the deacon or presbyter has been sentenced to prevent the sentenced clergy from being invited unintentionally to supply or serve elsewhere within the diocese. We received no comments at all to this, so we assume the language is good, and the rationale that we supplied in the original report we've simply reprinted here. And that concludes our report to you. So again, you who are delegates of Provincial Council, bishops, clergy, laity, you're going to look over these, and you have until May 31 to send me any written comments or suggestions you may have. And as you'll see, my email address is appearing on the screen. You can write that down. My email address, I think, may also be in the report that we send to you as well. Chancellors and others in the Anglican Legal Society, please remember this May 31 deadline. Our goal after this is to make any final changes and get to you before Provincial Council the final draft. And if there are no further comments, that's just fine. But we bless you and thank you for your participation in this conciliar, Anglican, and constitutional role of reporting and examining our canons. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your wise and thoughtful comments. Thank you for being a member of the Anglican Church in North America. God bless you, and we will see you at Provincial Council.